Okay. I will just finish off talking about this last point here. I'm talking about control of rage. I finished it rather briefly. I think I want to say a little bit more about the Green et al. Study. Baby smothering, kind of intriguing. Didn't want to leave you wondering what that was. It's a moral dilemma in which people are told to imagine that they're part of a group in a kind of conflict situation, and they're all hiding in a house, and outside is the enemy, and you know that if you make a noise, the enemy will hear you, and if the enemy hear you, they'll come in and they'll kill all of you. As you're sitting there in the dark, trying to be quiet, you notice that the person next to you has got a baby. There are different versions of this. It could be your baby in certain situations, but your baby, somebody else's baby, either of those two things work. You notice that the baby's about to start crying. You see it at that, and you're definitely told, you know that it's going to start crying, and the question is, would you smother that baby? And that's the only action available. Would you smother that baby in order to prevent the baby making a noise and from the enemy, therefore hearing you, coming in and killing everybody? Now, a lot of people, when they're given that problem, would say no, they're not prepared to smother the baby. Which, if you look at it in a kind of cold, rational light, is actually a very strange and irrational decision. Because, of course, if the baby makes a noise, then people come in, everybody dies, including the baby. So, by not responding to the baby, you ensure that the baby dies, plus everybody else dies. And these kind of responses lead to these kind of rage-like situations, and if you can suppress those by cortical control, then you can often stop the emotional part of you from taking control and let the rational part of you, which would be to kill the baby, you would follow those rules rather than the emotionally driven amygdala rule, which would tell you don't do it. Okay, so it's slightly more sophisticated than just rage, because these kind of elements, these kind of brain regions, and what Green did was basically give people these moral problems and put them in a scanner, would show that people who were less well able to control their rage would be more likely, strangely enough, to not kill the baby. Because there's something about this cortical control which doesn't just lead to you being able to suppress rage, but being able to suppress emotional responses of all kinds, and therefore come up with a more rational solution. So there's kind of always a tension between a rational decision and the emotional decision, and people vary in their ability to suppress these things. So love. Some people argue that there's no obvious facial expression. There's no look of love, although other people would say that they can pretty much tell when somebody fancies them, finds them attractive, loves them. You know, you think of the gaze of the adoring gaze of a parent on his or her baby or child, or the look between, two long-term partners or whatever. You might argue that there is something in there which is important as a facial expression, but maybe it's just because the facial expression is difficult to capture on a photograph, because many emotions kind of happen over a period of time, if you see what I mean. The way that an emotional expression isn't just a fixed thing, it's a change of the face, in the same way, for example, that if you think somebody's being ridiculous, you might roll your eyes. Okay, now there's an emotion which is signaling the fact that you're thinking they're ridiculous. But if you capture that in a still photograph, it might not well look like that. It might just like somebody looking up to the sky or something like that. So some emotional expressions aren't just fixed things that you could draw, like a smile or a sad face or an angry face. And this may be possibly one of the reasons why there's no obvious facial expression. There is one, but it's hard to capture. And also depends on context as well. Love is a form of unconditional selfishness, and in its kind of purest form, I guess, love is the desire, or the desire to rather die yourself than for somebody else to die. If you really love somebody, you would rather something bad happen to you. You would rather, and if they were dying, you would rather die in their place so they could survive, which is an incredible thing for an animal to do, and it's obviously got something to do with the kind of social bonding that we form when we form alliances and groups, friendships, and other kinds of relationships. There are many different kinds of love. Sexual love, parental love, companionate love. So companionate love is the love between friends, sexual love is the love between sexual partners, parental love obviously is the love between parents, and they're different. in many respects. They're different, but underlying all of them, the common denominator is that all of them are mediated by the neurotransmitter oxytocin, which is produced by the hypothalamus. And this is on the bottom right here, is actually, you can see that oxytocin is a rather complicated chemical, much more complex than serotonin, for example, which is involved in love. And it's believed that oxytocin is the roots of love, but also trust, the trust that exists between, friends and family members and stuff like that. And theory is, and research by Cosfield, etc., at the bottom there, there's a link to the paper there, is that that love began from parental love, or maternal love in particular. So it was a love for, they argue, for parents to children, particularly mothers to offspring, but also fathers as well, that's where love began. But love in humans and other animals became extended to other individuals around, so long as the correct preconditions were met. And it takes time to fall in love, and it takes time to form a trusting relationship with a friend. Again, coming back to the facial expression stuff, because you genuinely want to believe that they have your interests at heart, just like you have their interests at heart. That's why it's more difficult to form close relationships on the internet, because you can never be 100% sure unless you use video kind of stuff, video messaging and things like that. If you just do it through text, it's difficult to know whether somebody genuinely means what they're saying. Much easier to tell that somebody genuinely loves you and trusts you when you do it face to face, because these things are difficult to fake. Oxytocin also increases generosity and trust games and ultimatum games. So these are the kind of games where you say, you have some money and you give it to you can share your £10 with another person. Okay. Usually people, the basic one is you have £10, you can give some of it or none of it to another person. Surprisingly, as I mentioned in a previous lecture, if you have £10, most people give a certain amount of it away, even under conditions of double-blind anonymity. So that's where you don't know the person, nobody knows you, nobody's watching you, but you still give a certain amount of money that way if you give them the opportunity to do so. And it's somewhere between £2 and £3 is the average amount of money that people give away under those kind of conditions. When you inject people or give people oxytocin to boost their oxytocin levels, they give more money away. They become more generous. And they become more trusting. And the argument here is that that's because the increased oxytocin is kind of deceiving you into believing that this person is somebody of some kind of importance to you, a partner, a child, whatever. So that is leading you to, unconsciously give more money away, because the oxytocin is deceiving you to believe that this is somebody who's important to you. We've seen evidence there that there is, and the word hardwired I think is an unfortunate term, because hardwired literally means that something is fixed and cannot be changed, whereas I think that's not necessarily true with emotions. So hardwired is a bad word, and I apologise for using that. But what I would say is that there are neurological underpinnings of all the emotions which we have inherited from our ancestors and must serve some evolutionary function. The reason why I'm saying hardwired is a bad word, because it suggests that these emotions don't develop, and I think the evidence is that babies have certain kinds of emotions such as fear and pleasure, but possibly don't have other emotions such as disgust, or at least they don't have disgust in such a sophisticated way. That's why children can eat worms and dirt, because they don't find these things particularly disgusting. So certainly there's a kind of a developmental aspect to emotions, so they can be changed over time, whereas hardwired suggests that they can't. But at least what the general point here is the case, that there seems to be some evolutionary, biological, genetic component to emotions. But the question is, what is the adaptive function? Now, I discussed in the first screencast that one of the adaptive functions could well be to prioritize goals, but that's a general function of emotions. What about specific emotions? Well, fear is possibly the easiest one to explain. It's pretty obvious that if you're in a situation where your life is, or your health is being threatened by something, then to get out of the way, to fly off, disappear, not be there, is obviously going to be benefit. So when you're threatened by something, the emotional response of fear kicks in very rapidly and leaves you it puts you in a situation where you're going to get ready to go or maybe fight for your life. So it's prioritizing your survival over other things that you might be doing, such as eating or having sex or whatever it can be. And as Ekman says, people who do not have fear do not make good ancestors. And the reason why they don't make good ancestors is because they're dead, so they don't have any children. So we've obviously, all of us have had ancestors who've shown appropriate fear responses so that they can get out of there and have managed to survive to have their children and ultimately you. Fear narrows the focus of attention, it increases vigilance, and it makes you basically in a situation where you're better able to get out of there or fight. So it basically prepares your body for fight and flight. And rage can often be involved in fear responses. So sometimes when somebody threatens you, if that person you deem that person not to be particularly threatening, then the very fact that they're threatening may lead you to be angry and subdue them in some way, either through display or physically. Sadness is a response to failures of goals. So when you fail to achieve something, you can become angry. Ultimately, you fail to achieve something, you become sad. So if you fail to, if something bad's happened to you, you split up with a partner, that can lead to sadness. This is to basically the claim by Randy Ness here, is that this leads to soul searching to make sure that you don't make the mistake again. So you think about what you did and think, well, how would I do that again? So it leads you to withdraw from action, to enter a period of reflection where hopefully you'll learn from the mistakes that you made, if indeed you did make a mistake. So choose a partner a bit better next time, that kind of stuff. So there's a self-punishing aspect to sadness. And the fear of experiencing sadness through losing a parent, losing a child, losing a partner, motivates us to want to protect those individuals and whoever that might be, because we're scared of losing them, because we're scared of the immense sadness that we'll feel. So sadness is both reflective and it acts as a kind of, like a punishment to say, well, don't do silly things because you might lose these important people. Happiness, joy is a reward for goals. When you achieve a goal, when you fail to achieve a goal, you can become angry or sad. When you successfully achieve a goal, you do really well in an exam, or you get that thing on eBay. This leads to sadness, happiness and euphoria. So again, an obvious kind of reward function there that happiness plays in response to making good decisions. It reinforces the decisions we made in the past, rather than the opposite of sadness, which tends to make us do something different next time. Disgust is part of the behavioural immune system. I've just talked about this many times. This keeps us away from potentially harmful substances such as mucus, feces, rotting meat, which might harm us. So the immune system, the real immune system, the physical immune system, stops us from getting a disease once we've ingested something unpleasant, like a bacterium that fights off the infection. The behavioural immune system is designed to not have us not ingest that thing in the first place. So we will tend to disgust an emotion which tends to make us withdraw from things which might be potentially contaminating, such as these things here. A final study there is that it's not sure whether Scholl's argument here is correct, but basically he tried to show that disgust and contempt were similar, and disgust was involved in moral decision making. He gave people basically a questionnaire which asked how much people should be punished when they did a particular transgression, and if they were stood near a bin with nasty things in it, people were more likely to be more morally outraged by the things on this questionnaire, which is saying that almost like you're confusing the disgust you're feeling from the bin for the disgust that you're reading on the morality questionnaire. Although there have been some failures to replicate this particular study, but certainly disgust is part of the behavioural immune system. I think that's very, very widely supported. Are all emotions adaptations? Hard to tell, but you would like to think that many of them are, and I think we've looked at some of them there. Interest, obviously, is another one, which is going to be similar to panaccept seeking. But they can be maladaptive in certain cases, as we'll see in the lecture on Darwinian medicine, where they're excessive, such as anxiety disorders or depression or things like this, where these are kind of extreme versions of normal emotions. So there can be a maladaptive aspect to them in the extent to which they might interfere with normal functioning and cause problems like that.